you're speaking to us today in your relationship to the Miles Hall Foundation. You are the founder, director, president. What is your role?
So I'm actually executive director of the Miles Hall
Okay.
Foundation. Yeah, we're a 501c3. That means a nonprofit, tax
Okay.
deductible,
Uh,
tax deductible.
And Miles Hall Foundation named after your son, Miles Hall.
Yes.
Before we get into the details of the foundation, can you tell us a little bit about Miles?
Yeah, so Miles is my firstborn child. I met his dad when we were in college, who's still my husband, Scott. And yeah, Miles was just like a bright, shining light. He was just someone who would walk in a room. He had a very infectious smile. He was very gentle and kind, thoughtful, considerate. He was the kind of person who was a really good friend, very inclusive, always included everybody. Um, some of the things that I heard after Miles was killed was that he just made people feel welcome. And if someone was sitting alone at lunch, he'd be like, "Hey, come sit with us." He was just that kind of kid who just brought people in. Um, he was also artistic, and he learned how to play music, like the piano, on his own. And he was best friends with his little sister Alexis. Yeah.
Tell us about what happened in 2019 with Miles.
Yeah. We had started seeing signs of like kind of mental illness. Miles thought he was Jesus. He used to preach to our neighbors, go door to door. We live in a more white community, so Miles is African American, and that was kind of concerning for his safety. We basically try to have a proactive approach to make sure like police knew who Miles was, that just in case something happened and someone called, that they knew that Miles belonged in this community. He lived here for 18 years. That he was ingrained here, went to middle school, high school. So that was kind of our first kind of experience with law enforcement, is that we just wanted to make sure that they knew who he was, just to keep him safe. I had taken some classes with NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness. They had a family-to-family class, and that was one of the things they mentioned was make sure law enforcement know who your loved one is. Just because Miles was he became later diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. That explains the hallucinations, delusions, and Miles, his reality is different than yours and mine, because he literally thought he was Jesus. So one thing I also learned from NAMI is, you kind of just, you need to just meet them where the person is, where they are, right? We wanted to make sure that Miles would be as safe as possible. And it seems crazy that you would want to involve the police, but they are the ones who help with a 5150 call. So that's a non-voluntary hospitalization. That's the only reason that I brought them into the conversation with Miles, is that Miles didn't understand he was ill. He didn't understand that he had mental health challenges. So when someone doesn't understand, it's almost impossible to get help. So it's a very, very reactive system. It's not a preventative system with someone who has mental health challenges. Miles is in a case where he's considered has severe mental illness. So it's not different. It's not the same as someone who has depression or anxiety. Miles has a different thought process. But again, Miles is always very gentle, very kind. He never was aggressive. There was nothing, so when I brought the police in, it was just of, hey, my son is showing signs of mental illness and we might need your help with 5150. So that's kind of how that in 2018, the year before he was killed, we actually had established a relationship with him 2 years before Miles was killed. Just so, like I said, the police, Walnut Creek police, just knew that Miles was part of the community, that he was, showing signs of mental health challenges, and we were just trying to get him help. Because what I found is there's no resources, really, for someone who's over 18, who doesn't understand they're ill. So that's part of the whole breakdown of the system that is not set up for someone who has mental health challenges, and someone who you're trying to help. It's just the system's not set up. So again, keep in mind, like I said, it's a relationship over 2.5 years. Um, it wasn't a situation that was any volatile, you know, um, um, relationship with them. It was all a preventative relationship, trying to get him the help he needed. So we were successful the year before in 2018, getting Miles a 5150, a successful voluntary hospitalization. We noticed that Miles was doing really well because now he was put on an injectable medicine that helped with his delusions and hallucinations, and it was literally night and day. So we were very, very happy about the possibilities for Miles. And he started wanting to, have a girlfriend and get a job. He actually got a job, and also he started making more friends because with the imbalance of the brain, this medicine helped him to be more to be more reality and not in a place where his delusions were kind of taking over. Now that we have this relationship with the police, we start seeing Miles kind of having delusions and hallucinations again. Early in the week, I had reached out to the mental health officer that we now have a relationship with. We know the day before Miles was killed, and I just I reached out to her. She didn't call me back. I also reached out to the non-emergency line just to say, hey, it looks like Miles is having some delusions and hallucinations again. You might be getting calls from neighbors because there were calls from neighbors the year before. So the next day, Miles is in a full-blown mental health emergency. He's talking, thinking he's Jesus. One of the neighbors next door, we have a very close little community here, gave Miles a garden tool because Miles was gardening, and so Miles was doing planting, and Miles, for some reason, he thought he was God and that this new tool was a staff from God, and he ended up breaking a window in our bedroom, like a slider, and for that moment, my mom was at the house and she had called 911. And I had also called 911 to get him help, to get him an ambulance, because now he has a medical emergency. But unfortunately, that's not the way that someone in mental health situations are treated. They're treated with police. And so Miles ends up leaving the house, and he goes to another cul-de-sac in the neighborhood. And the officers are on the scene. And within probably 30 seconds, they're shouting at him, saying his name, and Miles was trying to run back home, but they had blocked his way to the pathway. And within 30 seconds, they were beanbagging him, shouting at him, and then they started shooting. So Miles was shot 4 times, and he ended up dying at the hospital about 15 minutes later. So I go to the hospital, and this officer's there, the mental health officer, and she tells me, you guys did everything right. Your family, did the right things, trying to go to classes and involving the police to try to get him help. Obviously, that did not go to exactly where we had planned. We had planned to help the whole goals with having police get the 5150 was to help him so he could get medication again. He could be destabilized. That's all he needed, was just to get, he was having a delusion. So I knew from that moment when I left that hospital that my baby, he was 23 years old, he's heart of gold, literally, all his teachers always had nice things to say after the end of each year. He wasn't a criminal, and he didn't deserve the type of reaction, he was killed, he was murdered, and someone who has mental health challenges, especially when they're black, they have, like I said, a higher risk, and we knew that going into this relationship with the police, and that's why we tried so hard to make sure they knew who he was, that he lived here, that he was kind and compassionate. So that was basically what propelled FOSAF. That's Friends of Scott, Alexis, and Taun Hall. One of my friends, Shyama, she started this group. It was a Facebook group, and it grew from there to like 8 people that were like the core, and then it just kept growing. So it kept growing to the neighborhood. People ended up people would go to city council meetings twice a month. You were one of them, which I really appreciate. You've been a really great supporter of the work we're doing to honor Miles, and we really appreciate that, because it really does take a village. But that's FOSAF started, and then from that, it was like I said, I knew we had to change the whole system. The mental health system has major systemic problems that, especially for Black people of color, are way more in danger than someone who's white. So that's really the focus of our mission of the foundation.
Good job. But I would think it's very easy and perhaps more common to go in a direction of a dark tunnel, depression. Maybe even you and your family move to a new city or a new state to change your environment. How have you found the strength and courage to engage with the community and these organizations, and even go further to set up the Miles Hall Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like, yeah, it is hard, and it's very emotional. It's when you do this work every day. It's just a reminder of what happened to my baby, my son, and it's very difficult work to do, but it's also so important, because we want to make sure this doesn't happen to another family that comes behind us. We want to change laws and legislation to have safe alternatives for someone in a mental health emergency. So for me, I wasn't sure. I was like, maybe we will move. It's painful to think about, just over right across the way. His life was taken from him. He was killed.
Forces of change that you've been part of in combating and changing the system is AB 988. Can you tell us a little bit about what 988 is?
Yeah, so 988 was established in 2019, and it basically mandated that all states in the nation, in the U.S., had to have an easy to remember number. So 988, instead of calling this very long number that was 800, lots of other numbers part of that wasn't easy to remember. So 988 was created for all states, mandated, and unfortunately it's mandated, but there was no real funding from the government. It's just like all states had to figure out how to make this 988 system happen. So what happened was, when I was trying to reach out to city council, we were going to city council twice a month, board of supervisors, legislators, we knew that we had to change it at the top, the way that people with mental health challenges were being responded to. Police should not be the first responders. So I had met, after door knocking with several legislators. We were lucky enough to reach a very compassionate one, Rebecca Bauer-Cahan and Arinda. And I told her what happened, and she was like, well, so if there was another number to call, maybe that would have helped. And I was like, absolutely. I called the day before, and no, there were no resources when I called. So there should have been something, right? Because Miles was just in a delusion, and that would have been the perfect opportunity for a mobile crisis unit, someone who was a peer, someone who was a trained professional to respond to Miles while he was in a medical emergency. But that wasn't there.
Prior to 2019, there has been an over-reliance on law enforcement for mental health situations. In fact, continues to criminalize a mental health crisis. This isn't about defunding the police, but more about redirecting the funds and resources in hopes of decriminalizing a mental health crisis, to bring in more trained professionals and have that less reliance on law enforcement, and therefore a decrease in those direct consequences that are associated with those going through the mental health issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's what with AB 988, now that so what's different about AB 988? It's the Miles Hall Lifeline and Suicide Prevention Act. So what that is 988, as all states had to have this. California went the extra mile, and they were able to get telecom to put a tax on the 988 number. So now there is funding for California to have mobile crisis units. And that's what the difference is that throughout the other states, most of them don't have that.
So 988 is national, but in California, sort of the starting point, we've taken it a bit further.
Absolutely. Yeah, and taking it further, because what makes that so different is there's now you have someone to call, someone to come, and somewhere to go. So it's a wraparound service that supports somebody in a mental health emergency, which is a medical emergency. So you're taking away police and having the right responders, which are mental health professionals who have had over thousands of hours of training. It's not fully operational at all yet, because it takes time. This has only been almost a year that this law is passed, and they're still working on the structuring of it. Our governor, Gavin Newsom, is really prioritizing mental health and understanding that money needs to be, and then money needs to be there for this infrastructure, the call centers.
You know, you mentioned earlier that you had done everything right. Has there ever been a moment where you wondered if you did something wrong?
So yeah, everything is wrong because the systems are wrong, because it set up our family and Miles to fail. When you see someone who's declining and there are no resources for that person because they're over 18, and you have to utilize someone coming with a gun, that's obviously not right. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of things that should have been different that day. Right? We should have had first responders that had mental health training help Miles.
I recently was over at Remembrance Park. In that park, there's a table that has a placard on it that simply says, "Talk about mental health." 4 words. What is our additional responsibility as a community, as friends and family, to facilitate and change how we perceive mental health, how we perceive mental health and race?
Mental health, it doesn't see, like you said, it doesn't see color, it doesn't see socioeconomic status. It happens to everybody, and mental health touches every family. So, some of the things that people need to do is just talk. That's why we say talk about mental illness, talk about mental health, because it's okay not to be okay. And we need to break the stigma that somehow, this is taboo, or that if you have mental health challenges, you're weak. So we just have to as a community, be there for each other, be there to know that, like, if someone's not feeling well, or they're struggling and having some depression, or that it's okay to reach out to a friend. Also, now there are more resources. We do have 988, which has capability to talk and text. So there's more, there are more resources that are coming out. But we, as a society, we just have to, talk about it in our schools, talk about it in our communities, and just normalize that it's okay not to be okay. That Miles is very proud to be black. Miles was he was ingrained in his ethnicity and who he was as a black man. Living in here in Walnut Creek was challenging for him because he didn't necessarily feel comfortable here, because sometimes he would walk on the Iron Horse Trail. He said people would, women would be like move away from him. So he definitely felt being black in America was triggering for him. He didn't want to live here. He said, "Mom, can we move to Oakland where I feel more comfortable?" So I say that because of his experiences and his kind of uncomfortableness being black in America, I guess. The Miles Hall Foundation is now doing a youth summit. So we have a youth summit in November. It's going to be at Diablo Valley College, and it's partnering with Mount Diablo School District, and it's going to be about being black in America. It's going to talk about how black people, especially men, have to almost code switch. They have to change their behavior to fit, to acclimate to society. There's also, in the black community, there's something where people have to do the talk with their kids about police. We're going to have that discussion. And we're going to talk a lot about mental health and mental wellness and how we need to break the stigma in our communities, but how we also need to know it's okay not to be okay. So that's something I'm really proud of, that we've been working really hard about this for a couple years, and it's now coming into fruition that this is going to happen soon. Mental illness is definitely not talked about as much, for sure. The therapy, people don't really go to therapy as much as in a black community. We're also trying to change that. But yeah, no, people who have mental health challenges, as I say, it can affect anybody. Mental health can affect anyone. But the problem is that when you're black and you have police responding, there's so much implicit bias that is happening because they don't see that person looking like them. So that's where the danger is. And that's why we need to really take away police when they don't need to be involved in medical emergencies, and they don't want to be there either. And Miles had 2 strikes against him, literally, right? And that's why when I started the journey to try to get him help, I understood that it wasn't like I was blind, and I didn't think he was different from somehow. I felt if we went to a different city, I felt more uncomfortable because I was like, well, the police don't know him there. So I had a false sense of security, clearly. Because when it comes down to it, and your loved one needs help, police, they don't see a person at that time. They saw Miles as a criminal. And that's where we have to take the criminalization out of mental illness, mental health. So it's literally life or death.
The Miles Hall Foundation has partnered with NAMI, as you had mentioned, the National Alliance for Mental Illness. Where can we get more involved and find out more information regarding the Miles Hall Foundation, regarding NAMI, and the events that you are a part of?
Yeah, we do have a website. So we have 2 websites. We have the justiceformileshall.org, which was just created, and advocacy. And then now we have the mileshallfoundation.org, which has information about our mission, our vision. It talks about events that are coming up. We actually do have Play for Miles weekend, and that's happening in September. So we're having an online auction that starts on September 1st. We have a poker party in Walnut Creek on September 8th, and we have a golf tournament on September 15th. That'll be in Concord. So there's ways that people can get involved people can donate an item to an auction. They can attend one of these events.
Nobody is limited to just the Play for Miles weekend, the golf tournament or the poker tournament, to make contributions and donations. They can go to justiceformiles.org and make donations on a consistent and regular basis just through the website, regardless of an event.
Absolutely, yeah, and that would, and that's how we're able to keep building and growing, is that we have, people like you, John, who see how this affects communities.
What do you look forward to?
Well, with the foundation, I really look forward to seeing us keep making changes in legislation. I look forward to the opportunity to create another criteria to get someone hospitalized. So right now you have to be a danger to yourself, danger to others, or gravely ill. There needs to be another criteria because those other three aren't working. So there should be a criteria that you see if someone's is in a temporary state of delusion or something, that's another way to get help. So that's something, as far as the Miles Hall Foundation, we're going to work towards, is just creating safer communities for families like ours and yours. So one of our initiatives that we're working on is we are working on a therapy portal. So we want to be able to give impacted families like ours, like mine, the ability to seek therapy, and the foundation will pay for so many sessions, like the first 8 sessions, and this will help. This is going to help families like mine who have been impacted by police violence and mental health, the ability to process the trauma. So it's going to be more trauma-informed therapy. So right now we're building that, and we're partnering with other providers that will be able to provide counseling services. So that's something we're really excited about as well.
Very much appreciate your time and having to tell a story that I'm not only do you live and have told many times, but
thank you. I appreciate it. And I always like to say when we end a call or a discussion is, say his name, Miles Hall.
We are going to say Miles Hall. Say his name, Miles Hall.